There's Russ. Jeanette, I saw your call. I didn't see a message though. So if you want me to call you after, I can. Can you hear me, Jeanette?
No.
Okay. I'll reach out to you after, unless you want to ask the question in here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm driving. I try to get it off mute, but I can't. So really quick, I'm doing a lease option with a purchase for land. And I don't really want to use that lease option for residential because it doesn't really fit. So my question is, can I use a real estate purchase contract for land? And then there is not on a state approved, but on I Googled a lease option for land. Can I put some of that verbiage in an addendum? So use a lease purchase contract and then have an addendum to say this is going to be a lease option to purchase. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. What I would suggest is just before you send it out, why don't you send it to either Russ or myself just to look at it? But
okay.
We're okay to use state approved forms and use the words in there and put them together. We're just not, we just can't create those documents. So if I
can't find a state approved form because I talked to the title company and they talked to an attorney and they said use a land option lease with the option to lease form, and there's not one on state approved forms that I can find.
Yeah, I mean, what you found is one that has been created by an attorney, I would assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we want to avoid is creating that ourselves. We don't want.
Yeah, I would just copy paste.
Bringing up I don't want you to create the verbiage of that, but
okay.
As far as using those forms or using verbiage from stuff that has been created, that's not a problem. We can do stuff like that. We just need, we just don't want to put our opinions in there and then create our own contracts from that. So whether it's from the state approved forms or if there's not a state approved form, then we can pull that information from other places. Let's just review it real quick before you send it out, just in case we're not seeing
I'll get that put together and then send it over for your review.
Perfect. Yeah, that would be great. Anyone else have any questions today? Okay, so I am going to go over some really fun stuff today. It's some of the administrative rules. And I know it's not always the funnest thing to do, but I'm going to go through these just so that we have them in our mind. And it's a good practice for us to go through these on a yearly basis, at least, so that we have that information for us. The challenge is just when you have any of those questions, bring those up. So I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because there's 25 of them. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. So when I bring it up, if you have questions, jump on and ask the question. If not, I'll assume that everybody kind of understands exactly what it says, and we can go through there. So let me share this. All right, Russ, can you see that? Okay. So this is our affirmative duties required of a licensed individual. So these are our requirements as agents. If we don't fulfill these requirements, the problem that it creates for us is this is where we can get into some legal problems. This is where we can have problems in our transactions. It's also one of those things where we get a lot of calls. Russ and I get a lot of calls that people want to get out of contracts, or they want to cancel their buyer broker agreement or their exclusive right to sell for a number of reasons. But if you're breaking one of these rules, it's really hard for us to say, yeah, we're going to keep you in this contract. We're going to keep them for 6 months. If you're not breaking the rules, then we're going to fight for you and keep your clients, because it is a two-way streak where they can't cancel on you. You can't necessarily cancel on them. They've got to have a mutual agreement on that. So if you're following the rules, we're going to help protect you. But we had a scenario a couple weeks ago where they basically just said they're not doing one of their fiduciary duties, and we looked at it and just said, if they're not doing the fiduciary duties, then we're going to let you out of the contract. So I'm going to go through these. This number, this is in the Division of Real Estate, our rules. So there's the section for you. Let me see here. If I highlight, I don't want to highlight anymore. Okay, so affirmative duties, an individual licensee shall uphold the following fiduciary duties. So these are what we've got to do. We've got to have loyalty to the client and our principal, their best interest in mind. Obedience, as long as it's lawful obedience. If they ask us to do something, then we should be doing that unless it's illegal. So the example that we had a couple weeks ago was an agent or the buyer wanted to put in these really lowball offers. The agent said, you know, I'm not going to put in an offer for you that low. Well, that's not illegal to put in low offers. It might not be the best practices, but it's not illegal to put in low offers. So in that particular case, the buyer didn't want to work with the agent anymore, and they weren't willing to put in those offers. So they were able to back out of those. Full disclosure obligates the agent to inform the principal of any material facts. Confidentiality, which prohibits an agent from disclosing without permission. This is one I see broken all the time when we have multiple offers or when somebody calls about a property. If you have permission to give information out, then you can do that. If you don't have the permission, then you need to keep your mouth shut. You need to not, and you can just tell them. I haven't had that conversation with my seller yet. So if it's something that's important to you, I can talk to my seller, but I don't have that information. That goes along with, do you have any offers on your house? What is the highest offer you will accept? You know, anything that pertains to those type of questions, you've got to get permission in order for you to be able to disclose those. And I find that we're assuming we have permission and we move forward. Next one is reasonable care and diligence. We've got to make sure that we are actually doing the jobs that we said we're going to do. And then the last one, holding safe and accountable all the money is entrusted to the agent. So I ran into an agent last week who was holding on to an earnest money check for almost 30 days. That's not holding safe the accounting for all the money. So any questions on our fiduciary duties that anyone has? Okay, number 2 is defining the scope of the vendor agents by executing a written agreement. So everything in Utah, in order for it to be effective, has to be in writing. It has to have a written agreement in order for us to proceed. So make sure that you're getting your buyer brokers signs. The sellers represented, exclusive right to sell, buyers, exclusive buyer broker agreement. It also needs to come down. We need to have in writing if you're going to be a limited agent. Okay, if you're going to be a limited agent, you're representing the buyer and the seller, you've got to have this limited agency agreement in there. Or whether or not you represent a property manager or attendant. Those are basically all under this section that everything needs to be in writing, or it's not. I mean, you can get in trouble for not having it in writing is basically what it comes down to. Number 3, if you're representing both the principal and the transaction as limited, obtain prior informed consent. That's the limited agency. Got to have writing from both buyer and seller need to agree, and they also need to know that they can be represented by somebody else if they want to. They've got to be given that choice. Also gives you the information that we've got to tell them that there's some information that needs to be confidential, and that there will be types of information that will not be disclosed for them. So that's something to inform them on. If that's something that's important to them, you may or may not do limited agency in that circumstance. The fiduciary duties that are limited for us. undivided loyalty, 'cause you can't have loyalty to both. Absolute confidentiality and full disclosure are the fiduciary duties that are going to be limited when we take on the limited agency. Any questions on representing, making sure your buyer brokers and your exclusive right to sells are signed? It also just tells us we need to make sure we get them done as quick as possible. I can't tell you how many times we have the conversation of, did you get your buyer broker signed? Oh, I didn't get that signed yet. Just keep that in mind, that it's something that we need to do on a as quick as possible. Let's see, number 4, when acting under a limited agency agreement, this kind of goes more into what we just talked about, limited agency. Any questions on limited agency? Okay, number 5, when making an offer to buy or sell or lease or rent properties, the licensee shall disclose in the initial contact with the other party the fact that the licensee holds a license with a division, whether the license status is active or inactive. So this is one that Russ and I have talked about last couple of weeks, where people are saying, am I disclosing my notice of interest? Like, where do I have to do that? Well, we found one section in our code of ethics that says we have to disclose our notice of interest. And then here is in our rules that says that we have to disclose on our initial contact whether we have a license or the license is active or inactive. And then this is, I highlighted this one, before the executing of binding contracts, lease agreements, disclosure in writing, agents for parties and unrepresented parties. So this is something we have to do before we do any of actually writing of contracts. And then this reemphasizes that fact, licensee's position as a principal in the transaction. So the question is, do I need to, if I came out and I said I didn't do the notice of interest on my contract, do I need to still do the notice of interest? This particular section says, yes, you need to notify them that you're a principal in this transaction. That's, you're either going to buy it, sell it, lease it, or rent the property. And then it just reemphasizes the fact whether your license is active or inactive or any other circumstances that you'll still disclose that. Any questions on disclosure of interest? That's been one that's come up quite a bit in the last couple of weeks.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
I have to go into an appointment really quick. So I am getting ready to lease a personal property. One of my, so do I need to disclose? They know I'm a real estate agent because I'm actually going to be their real estate agent. But in the lease agreement, do I need to disclose that as well? Because they're going to rent one of my properties until they find a home.
Yes, yes, you need to disclose that you have a license there. Now, you're not representing them in the lease, right?
Yeah, it's my house, my home.
Okay.
And they're coming here from Florida and they just need a place to live until they can find a house. So they're going to rent a property that I own on month to month. And then I'm going to be helping them find a property.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. You need to disclose that you have obviously they know, and it's implied because you've signed an agreement with, for the buyer broker to go purchase a property. But I would also go in and disclose in your lease agreement, maybe in the contract, maybe specifically stating for that lease that they understand that you have a license to do that, because that's where you can get in a little bit of trouble. Is like, obviously they can come back and say, well, they knew that they were there, but when we talk about having it in writing, that's going to be something that would come back on you if it's not in writing. Do you see anything different on that, Russ? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Number 7, before offering any property for lease or sell, verify accuracy of the content. So this is important with, like, on the MLS. It's our responsibility to, verify that information. Don't just copy the previous MLS and put it up there. we have an obligation to verify the accuracy of it. Number 8, before operating on residential property, source on which the lease relies for square footage. This is one we have in our seller's disclosures. We have it in the MLS input. We need to make sure that we're disclosing where that source is. So the question I get a lot on square footage is, this is, all right, I have an appraisal, an official appraisal, and I have the tax data, and I have an old MLS, and all 3 of them have 3 different square footages on there. Which one do I use and which one should I not use? The question really is, whatever one you choose to use, you need to cite that source. So I got it from an appraisal. I got it from the old MLS. I got it from the tax data. I would lean more towards an official document, so the tax data or an official appraisal. But either one of those is fine. Our job is not to look at which one and say, okay, which one is the most accurate. Our job is to say, where are we citing it from? And the buyer can go in and decide that. So if the tax records are wrong, or if the appraisal one is wrong, you're basing it off of what I would say, find the document that has the most, what would you call, legitimacy is where I would start with it. Okay, let's see. Number 9 is we need to disclose our agency relationship between licensees and client. So we do that in a couple different places. One, we have to do it prior to our agency of binding an agreement. We have it currently in our real estate purchase contract. There's one in there. Actually, this is a different one. I didn't find it. Yeah, so it's in the real estate purchase contract. We know where that is. We did see this happen once where they didn't have the buyer broker agreement signed, but then they disclosed in the REPC that they were the agent. So they're disclosing they have agency, but they really don't have agency. So you need to have the exclusive buyer broker agreement signed, and then you're going to disclose it in your REPC that you are approved agent. So just putting it in the REPC is not connecting you and your client together. It's basically just you're disclosing to the other parties that you already have this prior agreement that's already set. Same thing with when executing a lease or a rental agreement. You need to make sure that you confirm agency. And then, Jeanette, in your situation, you cannot represent them as a client in your lease because you are the principal in your lease agreement. So they can represent themselves, but it needs to be really clear that your client is not your client for the lease side of it. They're your client for the buying side. And I would probably put that in writing, because our exclusive right, or our buyer broker agreement, talks about you representing them in leases or in purchases. You cannot be a limited agent in a property you own. So
to understand, I would write leasee, or understands that that I am the real estate agent and I am not representing them in the lease of this property, and put the address.
Yeah.
In the lease agreement.
Yeah, I would do that.
Because one of the questions they asked me was, would I consider like doing a lease option for this property? And if I were to consider doing that, which I'm not right now, but in the future, I would have to let them know I couldn't represent them.
A lease option for your property?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you cannot represent them in your property. So if they choose to
if they were to purchase it.
Yeah, anything moving forward. So in your situation where you're going to help them with the buying one, the reason I bring it up is because in your exclusive buyer broker agreement, it says you represent them in the buying a property, leasing a property, and doing all of that. So you're obligating them to lease it. Then they're going to lease your own property. So you've got to have something that distinguishes that you're representing them on the buy side, but you're not representing them on your lease side.
So would I do that with an addendum to the buyer broker agreement then?
I would say that's probably a good place for it. Russ, where would you put that?
As well as in the lease agreement, you know.
Sorry, thought I was unmuting, but it wasn't. So yeah, just I'd say in that in an addendum would be right.
Okay, so to the buyer broker agreement stating, I'm not representing them in the lease of the property, like put the address, because I could represent them in a lease for another property.
Yeah, just separate that with your address. Just tell them that. I just want you to be really careful with, we cannot be a limited agent in a property that we're a principal at all, ever.
Yeah.
And so you've got a little bit of a sticky situation where you're saying, I'm not going to represent them. They're renting my house, but then I want to represent them as a buyer. Just make sure everyone's clear on that, that you're not representing them on the leasing of yours. You are being the landlord of that, the owner of it. So
I could put it in the contract, in the lease contract, and then do an addendum to the buyer broker agreement.
Yeah.
So that just so it's double understood.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to get into an appointment now. So.
Okay. Thank you for jumping on.
Thank you.
Okay, so so we talked about that. 11, 12. If the leasee desires to act as a sub-agency, we don't do sub-agency in our company. So we don't really want to we don't want to deal with having to go back to the sellers and the other brokerages and work it out. There's a lot of challenges that can come up with that, especially if there's a challenge in the transaction and somebody gets legal advice in there that could cause some problems. So we don't really want you guys to do that. Working with agents in our office is perfectly fine. I mean, with your license, we can do that, but as a company, we don't want to do that. 13, this is one that happens a lot. Provide copies of the lease or purchase agreement signed by all parties. This is one that we put it in .loop, we get one signature, and then we don't ever send it to the client again, so they don't get a fully executed copy of the contract. We need to provide the fully executed contract to our client once we have it. So just be careful with that. Once you have it, it's easy just to share back in .loop, just share it back with your client. The good thing about that is if somebody came back and said, well, I never received it, we can go in the history of .loop and we can see that you sent it, and then you can, that will be sufficient for them to say, yeah, I did send this to you, but even though they said they didn't get it. Okay, number 14, identify the seller's brokerage. That's already in the purchase contract, so you've got to put the principal broker's name, brokerage name. Got to make sure that we have that on the contracts. 15, timely inform the licensee and the principal broker about any of the transactions go. So the key that here is this timely inform. The way that we do that is through .loop. .loop in the far top right corner is a submit for review. Whenever you submit for review, the office goes through and looks at them. We have too many loops that are being made every single day that to go in and just look at every loop that is created is not, we don't do that. So you've got to go in and submit your information. And I would highly suggest you do that before your closing date. Otherwise, you might run into the problem where you don't have all the documents in there. And then we have to flag them. And then that's when people get upset of like, well, do I really have to go back and fix this? And then we make you go back and fix it and you're not very happy. So just submit it as you go. You don't have to have a full file to submit. If you're wanting to check on, 2 or 3 addendums that you've sent in or pass off some of the disclosures, just turn it into the submit for review. You'll see it on the side. It says approved. And if you're going into the closing table and everything on the left side says approved, you know that you're going to get paid. There's not going to be any questions. If you have things that say review or turn back, you got to go back and get those fixed. So I'd suggest doing that prior to closing. We see it all the time. That happens right at closing. In fact, there's sometimes we see transactions that we didn't even know transactions even existed until they want to get paid on it. And that's going to slow down everything that we do. Disclose in writing to the transaction and compensation, in addition to any real estate commission that will be received in connection with real estate transaction. Ensure the compensation is paid through the licensed principal broker. So anytime you're getting paid through a transaction, make sure that all goes back through the brokerage. If you're getting extra in addition to something, anything that relates to real estate, you've got to go through the brokerage to get paid on that. 17, no negotiating and closing transaction license may fill out those legal forms as provided from section 61. Okay, our job is we can fill out things, we don't create things. So this goes back to the question we had at the very start. We don't create new documents, we fill out documents, and we use approved addendums to make counteroffers, modifications to the contract. So if we have a contract that's in place and we choose not to use that contract, we create our own, which I see happen a lot when we're writing addendums from other agents. We are breaking this rule here. We need to just fill out the forms, not be attorneys in this situation. So make sure if you have something specific you want to say, find out if there's an addendum or some amendatory clause that pertains to that. Most likely there is. They keep adding them all the time, and that's helping us so that we can write the right words in there and not have to pretend we are lawyers. 19, this talks about signing on behalf of your client. If you can get away from that, don't ever do that. But basically you need to get a power of attorney in order for you to sign anything for them. And that even goes for initialing contracts or something simple. Oh, my client missed an initial on this one, but they're out of town now. I can't get the initial. I'm trying to get this done. Just don't initial for your client. Don't sign for your client. Stay away from that. Okay, 20, before signing or initiating a document on behalf of a principal. Okay, this is the same thing. So 20 is signing on behalf of somebody. Just don't do it if you don't have to. There is a right and a wrong way to do it. This is the right way here. 21, if employee an unlicensed individuals provide assistance in connection to real estate transaction and adhere to this other rules. So basically, if you're going to hire an assistant that doesn't have they don't have their real estate license, there's specific things they can do and there's specific things they can't do. Just make sure they're following those. 22 is about advertising. 23 is guaranteed sales processes. I know some agents do that. There's a proper way to do it. And then the last one really is 24. Immediately deliver money received in the real estate transaction, the principal broker deposit. That comes from the conversation I was telling you about at the start, where the agent had the earnest money for 30 days. Obviously, we know that it's due 4 days. So now all of a sudden it's their clients at default because the agent never turned in the earnest money. Just make sure you do that. So that is just a real quick rundown of all of the responsibilities we have as real estate agents. Okay, it's not in our business. We cannot use the excuse that I didn't know or I don't remember that. You know, there's two ways of breaking the law. One is that you purposely break the law, and the other one is omission, where you just didn't do something. In this particular case, this is what we have to follow, and if we understand it, we can use that to our advantage, and then we can protect ourselves and their client. So what questions do you guys have about some of our affirmative duties that we have, or is there any questions? Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. I know it's sometimes just reading through the rules is not fun. It's not the best thing to do, but just keeping those in mind will keep us protected through this process. So if there isn't any more questions, you guys can have a great afternoon, and we will talk with you if you have any questions in the future. You can always reach out to Russ or me. All right,